Welcome to Jargon, a podcast bringing clarity to commonly misunderstood business concepts. We're debunking and simplifying the buzzwords and ideas plaguing today's business world and offering a fresh perspective on these topics.
This is Bill Aimone. I'm here with Todd Boutte. We're here to talk about business intelligence today.
Are we qualified, Bill? What do you think?
You know, you're probably more qualified than I am because you have the intelligence piece on me for sure. I mean, I know you got that piece. But we're talking about business intelligence. When we talk about business intelligence, what do we mean by that?
Yeah, so what do we mean? So really getting your hands around all the data that's coming in from all the different sources in your company, right? Internal and external, and finding a way to distill that all into something actionable. You know, it's going to always involve some software, but that's the core idea, right? Giving you the data points you need to make good business decisions.
So essentially harvesting all the data that's in the company and being able to distill it down and making some intelligent business decisions. So business intelligence, probably the intelligence piece is probably more about the human side of it, more so than anything, because I can give you a bunch of data, but if you don't know what to do with it, you still have to, it's not a magic box or anything like that.
No, definitely not. And there's no magic kind of it anywhere in the process, really. You need to have, like you're saying, intelligence around selecting your data sources, right? Honing in on the valuable bits of information, and then building the appropriate tool set, the visualizations normally, that give you back, again, KPIs or any sort of key business metrics you need to make decisions short-term and long-term.
So frankly, the word business intelligence today really is referring to typically the software or the tools that people use to be able to turn a bunch of data into usable information that I can actually make informed decisions on. And that's really the key. So if we step back and just think about how business intelligence has changed over the past 10 years, let's talk a little bit about that, Todd. I mean, any insight on that and what's been happening and what are some of the trends you're seeing?
That's actually my favorite part of this conversation, really, because the key word for me is accessibility. So over the past 10 years, if we use that as the benchmark, people have kind of consolidated their business systems around a few key players, right? So Microsoft is a big one. We know the traditional ones kind of prior that still exist, of course, the Oracles, SAPs. But Microsoft, to me, stands out because they've built a product into an ecosystem of, that we use every day now. In Office 365, they developed Power BI. It's only, 6 to 8 years old, thereabouts.
But stepping back before Power BI, and Microsoft is, with their SQL Server database,
sure,
kind of starting with that, a lot of companies have built their systems on top of those or applications and tools that they use in-house to basically do CRM or their ERP, which might be their financial system and their accounting system. So it's sitting on Microsoft or even an Oracle database. And so if you kind of step back and go, okay, it's sitting in those environments, and now you're leading into this whole Power BI thing and what that is. But I'm thinking about before even Power BI kind of came into play, and Microsoft kind of is starting to own the market around business intelligence through Power BI since it comes with the application. Think before that,
you're right,
tools were really difficult and they weren't as easy to use. And so a lot of it required a super technical person to be able to do some heavy coding to be able to take the data that's sitting in a Microsoft or an Oracle database and turn it into a usable view for someone.
You're right. They didn't get this way overnight. So Microsoft has laid the groundwork and other companies like them, but it's easy to key in on their contributions here because it goes back to sort of the beginnings of systems. You're right. They were a leading data architect, and then they were a leading office productivity company. And now they're sort of bringing those pieces together and trying to give companies an option where they don't need to have an army of database administrators and developers to get at underlying data anymore. So I like to call out Power BI because it's the most obvious tool that I can say to anybody out there to go download and try to connect to your data. That's a fascinating thing that we couldn't say to clients 3, 4, 5 years ago easily. People really have the opportunity to get at their data now because Power BI doesn't really care what kind of data you have. Microsoft SQL Server, of course, is the one that comes up a lot, but you can have text files and Oracle databases and unstructured kind of folders of files you need to look at. And boy, anything under the sun, pretty much. It can connect to websites, pulling data from everywhere and it's giving people a chance to get at their data without waiting on, like we were describing, an army of software developers.
Well, I stepped back, maybe 20 years ago when there were some BI tools out there that we used that required coding. We would actually sit down and write code to pull data out of IBM databases, and then that would give us the report. Then we go stick it into Excel and do stuff with it. So really, what Power BI does, it replaces the coding to pull the data, and it potentially replaces the need to stick it in Excel so I can do some analytics around it.
Ideally, it does, right? Excel's got a bunch of limitations for the volume of data you can work with and how you can transform it. The irony is people still generally take a BI tool and then dump what's in there back out to Excel, but maybe a story for another day.
Well, I mean, I understand that because it's so easy to
It's familiar.
It's very familiar. It's so easy to use, but Power BI almost has that Excel feel to it too. It's almost like a super duper pivot table, really.
Right.
If you look at Power BI as that, because you end up putting pivot tables together, but then you want to save it so that next time you want to look at the data, when it refreshes, you can quickly pull that back up and you don't have to go create another pivot table to include more data and all that kind of stuff. So I think those are the keys to it. So really what it's done, what you're getting at, is it's simplified things. So I don't need to do the coding. I don't need to have the expertise. It's very intuitive. So really it becomes more of I'll call it a self-service business intelligence platform. People are using that word now, and people like to stick a word on top of something. And that's why we kind of started this jargon podcast. Self-service, really, as opposed to asking an IT person to create a report for them, they can do it themselves.
Exactly, and that's a trend that we've seen with multiple clients, right up till this very minute, is saying to, if I can introduce another piece of jargon, right, introducing to the company a data warehouse. And an IT department or sort of the data management component of the IT department can say, this is where all the aggregate data lies. You are now allowed to build reports off of this. And that is just incredibly powerful. So to me, that's the accessibility component, or the win, I would say, for accessibility.
Yeah, and you brought this whole thing around data warehouse and data marts and that type of thing. Still, Power BI does not solve the problem, though, of being able to translate the data that's sitting in, say, an SAP system or Oracle ERP or even a Microsoft ERP system. Mm-hmm. It's a bunch of information. It's really hard to understand. It's in these big, huge tables. In the database, it still looks like a bunch of code. Mm-hmm. You don't know. I've got a column called, with a long string of characters, and it's named something, right, and it's connected to another column over here. You still got to go through the process, and somebody does, to take that data that's sitting in the ERP and put it in kind of I'll call it user-friendly format that says, here are my list of geographies, here's my list of customers, and then this is my revenue, sales, costs, all the other metrics that you want to see. Organize it in a way where I can then drill down into it, and it's meaningful to me, because if you just take the data and dump it somewhere, people are going to go through and pick the wrong items. They don't parse it by legal entity. They don't parse it by geography, or maybe there's some data in there that represents something else that's kind of embedded in those columns that they've got to kind of separate out. So there's still that work that needs to be done.
Yeah, absolutely. But now we can kind of consider that an upfront investment of time, or at least in an ideal scenario, where this army, for lack of a better word, of data architects, DBAs, whatever, now spend time sort of consolidating what are the key structures in our data warehouse. Like, here's a table that's literally called chart of accounts. Okay, we're descriptive. We name the columns appropriately. And then we can publish this sort of group of all the aggregate data to our employees, instead of now spending time writing one-off reports for every single request that comes through. So you should now be able to front load the data cleanup processes, and then, not have to maintain a massive staff to keep your data looking good in the future.
Well, and I think a key to that, though, Todd, is even before that, some good governance around your data management, how you manage your data.
Absolutely.
So, for example, we've seen companies where they have multiple people entering in vendors in their system, and they might have a vendor called GE, another one called GE Power, another one called General Electric, and someone says, how much are we spending on GE? And they can't find that information, or they give them the wrong data. And so multiple people entering in that data, there's no governance around what are my standards for creating data. And that's where that front end piece is critical, because if you start calling vendors, supplier, even your customers different names depending on the person who entered it, it can create a mess, right? And so the report's output is not any good. So you've got to have good governance on the front end. And, they'll call it data ownership. So we always reinforce it with our clients. We say, look, have an owner and try to centralize the creation of a lot of master data. And so vendor master data, vendor attributes, customer master data. People go, well, where do I create my customer? Well, I created my CRM system, but I also created my ERP system. And there are two different customer names. They're not spelled exactly the same. And I want to run a report that gives me my pipeline and my sales. I can't marry it up because it's not the same. So that effort has to happen as well.
Yeah, business intelligence tools will not, there's no magic wand there.
Yeah.
Right? They can only report on the data as it exists. You can maybe make inferences that are quicker, or use that to help you in the data cleanup process, generate reports for yourself and look for those kind of problems. But you're right. The foundations have to be solid, right? The governance, the processes, there's no replacing any of those things. The intelligence tools that we're talking about, they are a window to your data, right? And that window could be cloudy, it can be cracked, it can be, really tiny, it can be really gigantic, but it's not going to provide you clarity that you need unless the data, is solid underneath.
Yeah, I like your analogy of the window. You can have real clean windows, but then look inside the house and it's a mess.
Yeah, or there's 1,000 tiny windows. Every one's at the size of a peephole, so you can see one little slice of your data at a time versus, the massive bay window that you really want.
Yeah, I like that analogy. I think the other piece of it too is getting agreement on, when we define metrics and what are things like, and people think oversimplify this, but what's included in my operating margin and what's not? What's included in my gross margin percentage and what's not? What do we include in EBITDA or adjusted EBITDA, and what do those metrics mean? And we see that often where one group will decide that, we're not going to include this particular operating expense in our margins because it's not relevant to us, but then another group does. And then they try to do comparisons, and we've got different versions of the truth, whatever that is. So we also recommend our clients go through and really get agreement on what's included in your metrics. What are we including in our utilization metrics? I remember a long time ago we had they would produce this utilization report on the drilling rigs they had for all their different divisions. And one of the divisions was complaining, saying, well, my utilization is worse than the rest because one of my rigs is the training rig for all the other divisions. And so why is that included in there? Because it doesn't have any utilization. So getting definition around what's included in my metrics and what's not is critical, because then people, if you start throwing metrics out there and holding people accountable for what's coming out of business intelligence, and it's not right or doesn't reflect what they think it's true, they're not going to believe the data. And then they go, oh, the data's not right, it's incorrect. And then they go off and create their own little databases and all that stuff to produce their own version of the world, right?
Right. They break ranks from this sort of, cultivated reporting experience that, people like us try to put in place. Terminology is critical. When we're developing reports for clients, we spend a lot of time making sure that a word we use here explicitly means the same thing on the next report over, or even the next tab over. But, in certain situations, different departments, different divisions of a company use the same word for different subsets of data, or they do include or exclude one numeric value. And then we have to catch that as a consultant and say, no, we need to annotate this right here on the page. And the good thing is these reporting tools let us do this. There shouldn't be any ambiguity, ideally, on a well-built report.
Yeah, and business intelligence unto itself doesn't solve those problems. The tools don't solve those problems. It's a process challenge that needs to be addressed. We've written a lot of articles on that, and in terms of data governance, in terms of defining your metrics. How does artificial intelligence, this always comes in, how does artificial intelligence have a play in business intelligence, and where do you think that's going from your perspective, Todd?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. We would certainly be remiss not to talk about that these days. Okay, so where is that going? There's some roots for this right now, and we'll go back to Power BI. I can't speak to Tableau, but since Microsoft is such a key player in this industry, they've already included some basic AI tools in Power BI right now. So an example of that is we can publish a little question and answer box in a report, and people can type human language to look for data in that report. They can say, rather than filtering a visual or finding the numbers in the report that they're looking for, they can ask a question. They can say, what was the revenue in Q1 of this year versus this year? And they can type that out as a sentence, and their systems will do their best to just put that on the page. To me, that's a precursor for what we can expect the report users interface with AI to look like. they'll be able to ask more complex questions and then be able to ask follow-up questions as a result of the answers they got. That'll be a very powerful tool to let reports kind of roll out to more normal-ish users, I could say, versus power users. That's one thing that's certainly happening. But on the data ingest side, there's kind of even power to be gained from AI from what we're seeing. So the idea being that maybe one of the subsets of data you want to look at is all built out of human language. So an example would be feedback, like customer feedback on a product line. Let's say you have 10,000 reviews of your product. Well, that is extremely time consuming to look through what is just humans typing things into a box. That is not a numerical value that can easily be parsed. So AI tools should let us find some common threads with language without having to spend dozens or hundreds of human hours looking through reviews and making some inferences as to the context of a review. And then without having to make a guess that a 5-star review is always meaningful when the text of the review says your product is garbage. So we can look for those kind of things, and you should be able to put summaries of that kind of data, straight into your business intelligence tools. That would be another, really valuable piece.
Yeah, and I think the caution here is the AI is applicable when you have a lot of data because it has something to learn from and infer from. So you mentioned 10,000 reviews. If I've got 500 reviews, the chances are 50. The chances are that AI is not going to help much because it may make the wrong inferences because there's not enough data to be able to parse through. Because I could look at 500 5-star reviews and say these all had these words in it, and then these 2 did not. And those may be anomalies that the AI tool can parse out. But if I only have 50 reviews or 500 reviews, it's not going to do a whole lot of good for me. It may make the wrong inferences.
That's fair, and absolutely. And you still need to be a good custodian of that type of data. So an example being that you'll see a product listing on Amazon or something, and they have iterated that product, let's say 3 times. It's V3 of that little widget that's being sold. But the page that has been selling it for 10 years still contains all the reviews from all 3 versions. Well, so if you dumped all of that into the same analysis, how valid is it? If there's just a swath of terrible reviews for what was V1, those have very little relevance to the V3 product currently. So, are you keeping that kind of thing in mind when you analyze data?
So what that really means is there's still going to be some actual intelligence from a human being to look at the data and make some intelligent decisions out of it. Because frankly, it can be dangerous if you're relying 100% on artificial intelligence to infer something and draw a conclusion that could be completely wrong because they maybe interpreted one word differently or their algorithm looked at something different. And you might know something specific like a version in your business, or let's say it's a restaurant, they got new management, all those things that happen when I look at data that you've got to be able to pull in, and AI is not going to know all of that. And I think it seems to be a misnomer where people think, oh, AI is going to eliminate jobs. It's more about saving you time and giving you I'll call it the business analyst who's looking at the business and more time to then make inferences out of things and add more value to your organization. So if you're a financial analyst and you've got AI doing something, you can take that and then go have more conversations with the people driving the business operations and help them make more informed decisions and improve the business strategy. I think that's important for people to kind of understand when we start looking at AI.
Yeah, I think right now, most use cases, we should be treating AI like the addition of a more powerful calculator to your life, right? Going from sort of a basic 4-function calculator to a scientific one, or from a scientific to a graphing calculator, right? If we can use some examples that we're more familiar with, these are just more powerful tools right now. The people using the tools are the key to making them successful, right? Or unsuccessful. If you put the same tool in the hand of somebody who has no idea about the product line that we just described, where it has 3 revisions, or it's being produced at 10 locations across the country, and really what we're seeing is that there's defects in 2 locations out of 10, but you're not going to be able to pull that from reviews if you just fed it to an AI or if you fed it to a person. Same difference. They have no context for your product.
Yeah, so people need to be careful and not get lazy with AI and think they're making all the decisions for them. So anyway, any other things we didn't cover, Todd?
No, I think that's a great start. I mean, what we could really do next, I think there's some room for this, is to kind of actively look at kind of what solutions or keeping up. Some other look at this in the future of what BI tools are really keeping up with the world versus which ones have fallen behind. Because we do get questions from clients, and this of like, well, I've been on this tool for 10 years. There's no reason for me to change. Well, maybe there is. And maybe there is some headache that is worthwhile versus what's not. But that's a more deeper dive for another day.
Yeah, well, Todd, I appreciate your insight, and this has been really good. I mean, I think in sum, a couple takeaways here. One is there's a lot of room for advancement for AI tools, and Microsoft's already started on that path, and probably others have as well. And then the other piece of it, too, is business intelligence is not going to solve all the problems. In the front end, you got to make sure your data is right. You got to make sure you have a good business process that sits behind it. And business intelligence is going to just be a bigger opportunity for companies to harvest more value out of their data, as opposed to the old way of spending more time trying to harvest the data and really spend less time mining and more time adding value to the business and being a strategic driver of change. Well, Todd, I appreciate your time today, and thanks for joining us.
Anytime. Thanks, Bill.